Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about two separate things I've already talked about, but kind of merging them together. This comes as a request from a whole bunch of people who asked about this subject, so I thought, what the hell, let's go ahead and talk about it. Basically, I did a video on both of these things separately, but now we're going to see what happens when you put them together. This is a Dreamcast that's been modified for HDMI using the DC HDMI board, and this is an mClassic, the latest product by Marseille, the guys who made the M cable. Now, a little bit of brief history here. Obviously, like I said, this is an HDMI modified Dreamcast, and I actually did a video on one of these quite some time ago using one that was loaned to me by Video Games New York. Now, unfortunately, because that console was not mine, it was not my place to be able to update the firmware for it and make changes to it. And at the time, the mClassic had not yet been released. So I did a video with what I had using that version of the Dreamcast and using the M cable and just kind of seeing what the results were. But I wanted to do an update video, especially because people have been asking for it. So in this case, what happened is Castlemania Games was cool enough to actually donate an HDMI board for the Dreamcast to me, and my buddy Jesse was cool enough to install it for me. I'll put their information in the description. You can check out stuff at Castlemania Games, or if you need someone to do the installation, my buddy Jesse is in there. So we got the whole thing up and running, it was all good to go, and I did a firmware update, and unfortunately it kind of bricked it. And so I talked to Citrus, the guy who makes the boards, and told him about the situation. We ran through a series of tests, and eventually we got the thing up and running again with a new firmware. So it's got a lot of features that the previous version did not have, and now it works great, and I want to thank Citrus very much for being so helpful in getting this thing to work again. So it's all good there. And one of the complaints I got on that video was actually the fact that I kept saying about how it didn't have anti-aliasing and the M cable made it look so much better and stuff like that, but it's, you know, they were like, well, you know, there is actually an anti-aliasing mode on the Dreamcast through that filter, or through the HDMI board. You just have to enable it. It did not, as far as I know, exist in the firmware I had access to, but I now have the updated version and I wanted to test that out. Now here's the problem though. That particular firmware, that feature, the anti-aliasing buffer, is not available on both versions of the firmware. So let me explain. The Dreamcast HDMI mod has a firmware now. This is actually a recent change. You download the newest firmware and it has two versions of itself. One is called Standard and one is called Relaxed. Now, Standard uses standard HDMI timings, meaning for maximum compatibility with monitors and TVs and recording devices and all that stuff, and things like the mClassic. Whereas the Relaxed timings cause issues. In fact, it will not work with the mClassic. It creates a whole bunch of flickering imagery, which we'll get back to later, and it also has compatibility issues with certain monitors, TVs, and capture devices. So I was unable to capture footage of it, which is unfortunate. Now, on the plus side, I knew I would be going to an event and there would be capture options available. Much better hardware than I would have access to, and I was curious to see if that would work out. And it did and it didn't. But one of the pluses of that was I also got to be able to record in 1440p, which I've not been able to do anyway, because the maximum I can record at is 1080p. So that was a nice perk. But now that's one side of things. The other side is this thing, again, the mClassic. Now, again, I did an entire video on this thing, but the basic pitch of what this thing is that it self-describes as an external GPU, which it's not really. That's just kind of like what it's trying to make you associate it with. But really what it is a post-processing filter that you put on any sort of HDMI compliant device, and it does a whole lot of things. It redraws every pixel on the fly for upscaled resolution, for anti-aliasing, for enhanced color, and so on and so forth. It does a whole bunch of stuff. I swear by it. In fact, I like this thing so much that even though I got a review unit for free, I ended up buying one anyway, so now I've got two of the damn things. I like it a lot. So, but now that we've gotten to a point where I have this, and I have a more stable Dreamcast, and it has the anti-aliasing filter that's built into it, what can I get out of that? Well, there is a plus and a minus here. The plus is I was able to combine these pieces and get a lot of footage, but I could only get so much given the context of where I was and what I was doing, and even their better capture hardware had issues trying to record non-standard timing footage, so I only got a small clip, but we'll get back to that later as well. So here's what I'm going to pitch to you. If you have a DC HDMI console The majority of you are probably going to say, okay, I'm going to go into the settings there, which is you basically hold the two triggers, and you press X, A, and start. Once you do that, you're prompted with this menu. The menu was designed for the HDMI output natively. So if you put it in a high resolution like 1080p, the menu is going to look really good. It was meant for that. And it gives you 4 different options on resolution output. One is VGA, which is basically just the standard VGA mode that was built into the console originally. Then there's 480p, which is like that plus a little bit of enhancement. And then there's 960p, which is just a straight doubling of the 480p mode. This basically preserves the aspect ratio generally of the Dreamcast while giving you basically the same resolution as 1080p, which is stretches it out, but is technically the more normal resolution. And most people will instinctively say, I'll put it in 1080p because that's a higher resolution. Duh, that just seems obvious, right? Especially when, like I said, if you set it to 1080p, the menu is going to look really good. I'm here today to tell you that I don't think that that's the right way to go. And I want to show evidence of this. So really in my opinion, what happens is, well, let me just show you some footage. So the first thing we have here is 480p. This is just Sonic Adventure 2 running through the HDMI modified Dreamcast in 480p. Now, keep in mind, this is already better than a stock Dreamcast is going to look, not including post filters and things like mCable, mClassic, what have you, but just native. This is better than it's going to look with a standard VGA output or VGA to HDMI output like a Gecko box or Bahar Bros, any stuff like by them, whatever. This is going to look better than that. And for the most part, this is actually where I would say keep the resolution set, which is going to be confusing. I know, it's counterintuitive. Why would you do that when you could have 1080p? Well, this is why. This is a 1080p capture of Sonic Adventure 2, running straight off the console, unmodified, no filters, no changes, nothing. Now, the resolution is higher, and one can debate aspects of the picture are clearer or cleaner, but not really. It exposes so much stuff. The higher resolution exposes so much stuff that wasn't really meant to be seen. You're seeing a lot of pixelization. And to be honest, I think it doesn't look as good. And that kind of is concerning. And so it doesn't have to be this way, though. I mean, you can see it. I'm sure you can see it, despite the fact this is a YouTube video and everything's been like compressed and all that stuff. I'm sure you can notice the difference between the two. But I'm here today to say we can fix this. We can make it look good. Here's what I suggest. You set it to 480p as we did before, and then you run it with the mClassic, and this is the result of that. Now, what you're seeing here, in my opinion, is the best. And the reason for it is that the mClassic is just doing the upscaling and the anti-aliasing and the color enhancement with basically the source footage, because the Dreamcast really is only meant to output 480p. So the mClassic is doing the maximum amount of work here, and it's really quite nice. This is actually how I keep the Dreamcast set up now. This is exactly how I run it. And we also have the added perk here of this actually being captured in 1440p, which is a nice plus. But I'm sure you're thinking, well, wait a minute, why do I do that? Why don't I just set it into 1080p mode? Because again, it's built in there. I could put it in 1080p. If I set it in 1080p and then put the mClassic in, won't it be even better? The answer is no. It'll actually be exactly the opposite, as you can see. This is that exact scenario that I just described. Putting it in 1080p mode, then using the mClassic, you're seeing 1440p version of that. The problem with that scenario is the Dreamcast has to do most of the upscaling from 480p to 1080p, and it's frankly not as good at it as the mClassic is. So once the mClassic gets access to the source, it's already upscaled, it's already altered, it's already different, and there's only so much it can do with it at that point. It's better than the native 1080p output. It is doing something, but it is simply not as good if you just let the mClassic do 100% of the heavy lifting. Again, here's that. This is the mClassic doing 100% of the lifting from 480p to 1440p. You can't tell me that this doesn't look better than the native 1080p mode. You just can't. It's objectively better. So that's honestly how I would recommend running it if you have that choice. Now for that, obviously, you would require having to pick up an mClassic as well. So if you want, I'll put a link in the description to that. You're free to get one, check it all out, and combine it. But that's really what I swear by on those things. Unfortunately, we won't be able to get the most out of this because while the footage was captured in 1440p, it turns out my computer, at least the editing software I'm using, is only capable of rendering it at the highest at 1080p, and that includes exporting. So yeah, unfortunately, as good as it looks, it actually looks even better in the source footage. So it's just one of those things where it goes to show you, like, there's nothing that beats a real display demo. So if you ever get the chance to check this out in person, you really should. We're going back here. I know one of the points of this was to basically see how does the anti-aliasing filter that's built into this thing compare to the mClassic. Unfortunately, because of the non-standard timings issue, I was really having a hard time trying to get footage of this, and there's only so much I can push to try and get that to work in that type of environment. Again, I was not using my own equipment. So in that case, really all I got was this one little clip, which I'm going to show you now. This is a short clip, but as you can see, this is the game. This is running in 1080p, and it's switching between the filter on and the filter being off. And we're going to zoom in here, and I'll show you this against a car in the background. And you can see that there is some change there. Now, the thing about the filter is it's not bad. It's actually quite good. Now, when you're not recording the footage and you can actually use it on a television and just kind of play with it, you'll be able to get better results. In that scenario, I once again suggest setting the console to 480p and running the filtered mode. It won't be as good as the mClassic because you will still be outputting 480p and it will not be upscaled, but you will get a better filtering process over it. Again, the mClassic wins in that regard, but it has an unfair advantage. It is actually hardware specifically designed for that function, whereas this is kind of a bonus feature. And I stress that it is a bonus feature because you have to put it in non-standard timings output in order to even use it. So it's not really recommended. It is a bonus feature. What I would love to see, personally, is running the Dreamcast with that filter enabled and then attach an mClassic. But again, not possible currently on this version of the firmware because, and I don't know if this is fixable, I'm not an engineer. Maybe if Citrus, I don't know if that's possible. It has to be something you're aware of. If it's possible to add that filter into a standard timing firmware, then add the mClassic to it, I'd be very curious to see if that would look better or if it would be gross. Maybe it would be too buffed out and it wouldn't look good. I don't know. That's what I really wanted to test, but unfortunately there's no way to do that. So final conclusion here is, until this has been updated once again, I guess, is the mClassic running in 1440p or 1080p if that's what your TV supports. Unfortunately at home, my 4K TV does not support 1440p, so I have to do it in 1080p. So I get 480p out of this console, upscaled and enhanced by mClassic to 1080p, and that's the way I do it. If I could do it in 1440p, trust me, I would. It looks much nicer. But that's my ideal setup. And I feel like just more people need to try that and see what they think. But again, at the end of the day, it's your money. You do whatever you want. Try it any which old way you like. But those are my recommended settings. So there you go. Once again, I want to thank Castlemania Games. I want to thank my buddy Jesse. I want to thank Citrus. I want to thank the guys in Marseille. I want to thank you guys very much for watching. If you could please like, comment, subscribe, and all that great stuff, I'd really appreciate it. Social media stuff's in the description. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, all that stuff. Thank you very much. I'll see you all later.